Sea Level Rise by Addie Part A, Erica Part B, and Cindy Part C.
This video demonstrates sea level rise over time and its takeover on land around the world. Sea level rise is the increase of the ocean's average position compared to its land. Why is this a problem? The rise of the sea level causes flooding, shore erosion, increase in storms and their intensity, and harming areas economically. For flooding, the sea level flows over land and can create normal and big tide floods, also known as nuisance floods. In the cases of shore erosion, land can be underwater and can be split apart from the intensity. Overtaking land with water can damage infrastructures and can then lead to needing repairs, which has already cost the U.S. $500 million in yearly property losses. Also, the weather gets much worse and can create hurricanes or big storms, as the winds send the high-level water into land, which also can be called a storm surge. Lastly, where's the sea level rise making an impact? First, sea level rise can majorly affect many coastal areas. Globally, 8 out of 10 of the world's largest cities are by a coast. Additionally, islands and smaller islands are in danger because they're fully surrounded by an ocean. Also, more specifically, the rise will hurt tropical and subtropical river deltas where rivers meet the sea, and mostly the U.S. East and Gulf Coast, Asia, and islands. The photo on the right represents the sea levels over the world that have been changed to where they are in 2023 since the beginning in 1993. As you can see, the ocean's level has mostly risen at least more than 5 centimeters, and nearby some coastal areas in the U.S. or Europe, the sea level has risen higher than 10 centimeters. This graph is going into depth on what causes sea levels to rise. First, greenhouse gases are emitted to the air from people's actions on Earth. The 4 main greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and water vapor. These are all added from either cellular respiration from humans, burning fossil fuels, land usage, and industrial productions. On its own, the atmosphere warms the Earth as its gases trap the heat from the sun. With additional amounts of greenhouse gases, extra heat is absorbed and the Earth's temperature rises, which overall creates global warming. Now, the rise of the Earth's temperature can cause 2 things. First, it can cause the volume of the ocean to expand. In general, liquids do thermal expansion, which is when water grows when it is warmed. So, as the ocean does diffusion, it takes in this heat, expands, and causes the sea level to rise. Also, ice glaciers and sheets are not given a cold environment anymore, and as they're surrounded by warm temperatures, they start to melt. And when they melt, all the ice turns into water and adds more water to the ocean. The photo on the top right is an example of an ice glacier, and on the bottom left is an example of an ice sheet. An example of how sea level rise impacts a specific coastal state is Maryland. As you can see in the right photo, Maryland is directly next to the Atlantic Ocean. Shown in the left photo, Maryland is a great example of how sea level rise affects the world. In this photo, Maryland experienced nuisance flooding, which is again high tide flooding. The ocean water went over the land and almost brought damage to Maryland's architecture and industries. Also, this can represent possible land loss and coastal erosion as the photo shows the land was submerged and could be broken apart. This overall shows a real-life example of how sea level rise is impacting lots of people, and it can bring lots of harm and problems.
The graph on this slide shows global sea level change, and a majority of these sea level changes have occurred due to human-influenced climate change since the 1900s. Impact on human population is demonstrated in this graph because the darker areas indicate more populations at risk from sea level rise by the year 2100, which is the next century. Based off of the graph, Louisiana, Florida, and the majority of the East Coast will be the most affected since their populations are located closer to the oceans. To explain the graph further, 2.4 million people will be affected by almost 3 feet of sea level rise, and Florida will account for nearly half of that number. 100,000 residents will be impacted in California, Louisiana, and the Florida counties, and as a total amount, 13.1 million people will be affected by 6 feet of sea level rise in the United States. Although there's a lot of impact on the human population, wildlife will also experience a lot of impacts to its habitats and will experience a lot of changes as well. This graph shows the wetland environment, which is an environment that contains many animals and organisms, and it will also be highly impacted. Going based off this graph that shows wetland loss, Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, and Tennessee will experience the most wetland loss, which is not good for the environment. Additionally, rising sea levels have already begun to affect fish and wildlife habitats. For example, shorebird and sea turtle nesting habitats have been affected, and 1 foot of sea level rise could affect potentially 17 to 43% of the current wetlands.
Okay, so there are many solutions to help prevent these floods and erosion. So one solution is to build seawalls. And seawalls are strong structures that are built along the coastlines to act as a first line of defense against flooding and erosion. So how they work is they absorb and deflect the energy of the waves. So for example, in this diagram, the ocean is traveling into the inland. However, the seawall absorbs the energy and then redirects it back where it came from. So some negatives though are that it is high construction and it does require a lot of maintenance, which makes it very costly, and they can block the beach view and access, especially those with disabilities. So it comes in different materials. So for the first example is the vinyl sheet piling, and this one is very lightweight and making it very easy to install. However, because it is lightweight, it's not as strong. Next one is riprap, which are boulders, and this is good for like ecosystems and other marine animals, and it's very natural looking. And then the last one is concrete walls, which are very strong and durable, but because they're so strong and durable, they do cost more. And lastly, people that might be impacted by seawalls are taxpayers, because they have to essentially fund this project, and local residents because they will be losing beach access. The next solution is to restore natural defenses. So natural defenses will protect shorelines as they absorb wave energy, prevent erosion, and reduce flood damages. So they use natural materials. So that means that it is very cost effective, since they can repair themselves over time, and it does require lower installation costs. Also, it provides habitats for other organisms, and it provides cleaner air, water, and it stores carbon among themselves. However, some challenges are that they could take years to fully grow, and they do need specific conditions to survive. So one example are oyster reefs. And for example, in this diagram, as the ocean travels to the shore, the oyster reefs almost act as like a little underwater speed bump, and it reduces wave action and erosion, which reduce erosion. However, they do take years to establish, and they only work in shallow and calm waters. Next example is mangroves, and mangroves are a bunch of trees that are put together. So in this diagram, as the ocean travels, the mangroves roots and branches, they slow down the water and protect like the shores. They also can store large amounts of carbon, which is good, and they also provide habitat to many organisms such as fish and birds. But again, they do take years to fully mature, and they can only grow in specific environments. People that might benefit from this are coastal residents, as they gain safety, and fishermen because they gain new organisms and opportunities. Okay, and the last solution is to reduce fossil fuel usage, because one of the main causes of sea level rises is global warming, and burning fossil fuels releases carbon into the atmosphere, which results in global warming. So some of the main sources are like cars, trucks, factories, and also everyday things we use, such as like heat and electricity. So if we would want to prevent like sea level rise, we would need to shift to clean energy. So that means moving away from fossil fuels and looking at like solar panels, wind, and like using electrical vehicles instead of like relying on gas powered cars. And if we were to switch, it would slow the pace of global warming, and this would result in slowing down sea level rise. There are also other benefits in reducing fossil fuels, such as there will be cleaner air, less pollution, and it's tackling this the root cause, and if you're looking at the long term, it will be more affordable. But there are also some challenges, as it's going to be expensive to switch at first, and some industries may lose some jobs, and it will take global cooperation, which may be hard. And also, the results aren't instant, it will take time. So if you can see in this top diagram, it's showing how factories and cars release carbon into the atmosphere, which leads to global warming. But if we were able to reduce fossil fuels, it would look like the bottom one, which means that there isn't as much carbon being released in the atmosphere, which will help the main problem. This may impact people positively and negatively because, well, firstly, people will be losing jobs, and some people aren't as fortunate as other people, so it would be a hard switch. But positively, people will be getting cleaner air, and like the future generations will appreciate it. Even though climate change is already happening, you can help prevent it. You can lower greenhouse gases by biking instead of driving. You can reduce waste, like reduce, reuse, or recycle. You can even lower energy use, such as adjusting your home temperature. So to prevent sea level rise from taking over our land, ruining our communities, you should take these actions into consideration to help stabilize sea levels globally. And then here are our resources.